On April 8, 2026, 50 Israeli Air Force fighter jets lifted off from bases across Israel and within minutes began striking more than 100 Hezbollah targets simultaneously across Beirut, the Beqaa Valley, and southern Lebanon. The Israeli military called it the largest coordinated wave of strikes since the Lebanon war began. Approximately 160 munitions were dropped in a single sustained campaign that flattened command centers, intelligence headquarters, weapons storage sites, and infrastructure belonging to Hezbollah's Radwan Force and its aerial drone unit. Lebanese authorities reported more than 180 people killed and 890 wounded in the first casualty counts, with medical officials warning the toll was not yet final. At the center of that strike package, as it has been at the center of every major Israeli air campaign for nearly 3 decades, was the F-15I Ra'am. The name Ra'am means thunder in Hebrew. It is an appropriate name for an aircraft that has become the defining instrument of Israeli air power since it first entered service in January of 1998. Since March 2 of 2026, when Hezbollah formally re-entered the war in retaliation for the killing of Iranian Supreme Leader Ali Khamenei during the opening strikes of Operation Epic Fury, the Israeli Air Force has conducted hundreds of strike waves against Hezbollah positions across Lebanon. The fighting has killed more than 1,500 people in Lebanon, displaced nearly 1 million from their homes, and reduced large portions of southern Beirut, the Dahiyeh district, and Hezbollah's infrastructure across the Litani River basin to rubble. Through all of it, the F-15I has been the primary delivery vehicle for Israeli precision munitions at range and at scale. This is not the first time the Ra'am has carried out this mission. In September of 2024, it was F-15I jets from the 69th Squadron, the Hammers, operating out of Hatzerim Air Base in southern Israel, that killed Hezbollah Secretary General Hassan Nasrallah. Each aircraft in that strike package was loaded with 7 joint direct attack munition bunker busters, 2,000-pound GPS-guided penetrators with steel warhead cores designed to drill through reinforced concrete before detonating. 8 aircraft participated, meaning the total weapons load delivered onto a single subterranean command and control complex in the Dahiyeh suburb of Beirut amounted to 56 precision-guided penetrating bombs. The strike was described by Israeli Air Force commanders as having been executed without any enemy counterfire, and the squadron leader reported that everything went smoothly. It was the kind of deep precision strike that the Ra'am was specifically designed and built to execute, and it ended the career of one of the most wanted men in the history of the Israeli security establishment. Since the current Lebanon war resumed in March of 2026, the Israeli Air Force has struck more than 3,500 targets and killed more than 1,000 Hezbollah fighters. Strike waves have reached Beirut's southern suburbs, the Beqaa Valley, the cities of Sidon and Tyre, the Baalbek district, and the Lebanese-Syrian border region near Hermel. The bridges over the Litani River have been systematically destroyed to sever logistical connections between southern Lebanon and Hezbollah's northern supply chain. On April 8 alone, the IDF struck the last functioning coastal bridge linking Tyre to Beirut. Hezbollah's intelligence chief Hussein Makhled was killed in the opening phase of the current campaign. 5 senior commanders from the Lebanon Corps of Iran's Quds Force were eliminated in a single precision strike on Beirut. The head of Hezbollah's intelligence headquarters, Adham al-Uthman, of Palestinian Islamic Jihad's armed wing operating inside Lebanon, and multiple Radwan Force commanders have all been killed in targeted strikes. Each of those missions required the range, the payload, and the precision that only the F-15I provides in the numbers Israel needs to sustain a campaign of this scale. The current war in Lebanon formally began when Hezbollah launched rockets and drones at Israeli military bases and oil and gas infrastructure on March 2, 2026, one day after the killing of Khamenei. Israel responded immediately with strikes across Beirut, declared Hezbollah's action an official declaration of war, and ordered its ground forces to advance and seize positions inside southern Lebanon. Israeli ground troops are now operating as far as 6 miles inside Lebanese territory. The IDF has struck Al-Manar Television's headquarters in Beirut, systematically targeted Hezbollah communications infrastructure, and conducted the largest coordinated air assault in the current war on today's date, April 8, while simultaneously managing the implications of a U.S.-Iran ceasefire announced through Pakistani mediation that Israel has explicitly refused to extend to the Lebanon front. Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu issued a direct statement that Lebanon was not included in the ceasefire, and that operations against Hezbollah would continue until Israel's political objectives were achieved. IDF Chief of Staff Lieutenant General Eyal Zamir stated that the military is deepening its multifocal effort to degrade Hezbollah and establishing a forward defense posture to protect Israeli civilians from direct fire across the border. In that context, the F-15I is not a historical artifact, it is an active weapons system and a live war being fought today. To understand why the Ra'am has become irreplaceable in the Israeli order of battle, you have to understand what makes it technically different from every other tactical aircraft in the region. The F-15I is derived from the American F-15E Strike Eagle, the two-seat deep interdiction variant of the F-15 family. But the Ra'am is not simply an off-the-shelf purchase. From the beginning, it was designed as a collaboration between Boeing and Israeli defense firms, including Elbit Systems and Israel Aerospace Industries, with Israeli avionics, Israeli electronic warfare systems, Israeli weapons integration, and an Israeli operational philosophy baked into the airframe from the ground up. The aircraft is powered by two Pratt & Whitney F-100PW229 afterburning turbofan engines, each generating 29,000 pounds of thrust, with afterburner engaged. Together they give the Ra'am a thrust-to-weight ratio that pushes the aircraft beyond Mach 2 at altitude and enables it to sustain supersonic performance across a wide range of flight profiles and altitudes. The airframe can reach a service ceiling of 60,000 feet. With conformal fuel tanks installed as a standard configuration, the aircraft carries a combat radius exceeding 1,000 miles without aerial refueling. Total unrefueled range is reported at approximately 2,700 miles. A figure that military analysts have described as previously achievable only by bomber-class aircraft and operationally significant for Israel, because it places the entirety of the Middle East, including Iran, within the aircraft's reach on a single fuel load. The payload capacity of the Ra'am is one of its most critical tactical attributes. The aircraft can carry up to 23,000 pounds of ordnance across 11 hardpoints, including the conformal fuel tank stations built into the flanks of the fuselage. In the Nasrallah strike, 8 aircraft each carried 7 bunker-buster JDAMs simultaneously, a total weapons load across the strike package that no comparable aircraft in the Israeli inventory could replicate in a single coordinated sortie. The weapons integration on the Ra'am covers essentially the full range of Israeli and American precision munitions. The GBU-15 modular glide bomb carries a range exceeding 9 kilometers and provides standoff delivery against defended targets in all weather. The Rafael Popeye air-to-surface standoff missile extends that reach to over 110 kilometers, giving the crew the ability to launch against targets from well outside the engagement range of most point defense surface-to-air systems. The Paveway series of laser-guided bombs provides terminal precision against hardened and semi-hardened structures. The GBU-28 Deep Penetrator, with its 5.8-meter length and more than 2,000-kilogram weight, is the most capable bunker-defeating munition in the Israeli arsenal, and the F-15I is the only Israeli aircraft capable of carrying and delivering it. The Joint Direct Attack Munition family in multiple warhead and fuse configurations provides GPS-guided precision across a range of target types, from command and control bunkers to open-area supply depots. On the air-to-air side, the Ra'am carries the AIM-9 Sidewinder, the AIM-120 AMRAAM for beyond visual range engagements, and the domestically developed Rafael Python 4 missile, which provides full-sphere engagement capability against targets at very high off-bore sight angles. The aircraft also retains the M61A1 20mm Vulcan Gatling cannon internally. This combination of standoff precision strike capability, medium and short-range air-to-air missile coverage, and internal gun makes the Ra'am a true multi-role platform capable of prosecuting both air-to-ground and air-to-air missions on the same sortie without configuration change. The avionics suite was designed around Israeli operational requirements rather than American doctrine. At the core is the Hughes APG-70I synthetic aperture radar, modified from the standard American APG-70 to Israeli specifications. The system provides terrain mapping capability and generates high-resolution ground imagery in all weather conditions and at night, allowing the weapons systems officer in the rear seat to locate, classify, and engage targets independently of sensor inputs from targeting pods. The APG-70I also provides the look-down-shoot-down capability against low-flying threats that was a core requirement of the original F-15 design, distinguishing moving low-altitude targets from ground clutter in a way that earlier fighter radars simply could not do. Alongside the radar, the aircraft carries the LANTIRN, a combined pod system standing for low-altitude navigation and targeting infrared for night, which provides two distinct functions. The navigation pod uses forward-looking infrared to enable the aircraft to follow terrain contours at high speed and low altitude without relying on external radar emissions that could betray the aircraft's presence to ground-based detection systems. The targeting pod carries a high-resolution infrared imaging sensor and a laser designator that enables the crew to independently acquire and designate targets for laser-guided weapons without reliance on any ground-based or airborne laser illumination system. The combination of terrain-following navigation and independent laser designation is what made the F-15E, and by extension the Ra'am, the Israeli Air Force's primary night strike platform, capable of operating in weather and at times of day that grounded every other aircraft in its inventory. The Kaiser holographic head-up display presents critical flight and weapons data in the pilot's forward field of view. More significant in the context of Israeli operational doctrine is the Elbit display and sight helmet system, which allows both crew members to cue sensors and missiles onto targets simply by looking at them. The helmet-mounted sight tracks the wearer's line of sight and slews the aircraft's sensors and weapon seekers to that point of regard, allowing the pilot to designate an off-bore sight target for a heat-seeking missile without pointing the nose of the aircraft at the target first. In close-in combat, this capability changes the fundamental geometry of an engagement, enabling engagements at angles that would be geometrically impossible for a pilot without helmet cueing. The Elbit system on the Ra'am represented a significant Israeli technological advantage in helmet-mounted cueing at the time of the aircraft's introduction, and remains competitive with current systems. The F-15I's electronic warfare suite reflects Israel's particular emphasis on operating in dense, high-threat environments. Israel regularly confronts advanced surface-to-air missile systems in Lebanon, Syria, and potentially Iran, and the electronic warfare systems on the Ra'am were configured by Israeli contractors to meet requirements that have never been publicly disclosed in detail. Israeli defense officials and independent analysts broadly described the suite as substantially more capable than standard American export configurations for comparable aircraft. A radar warning receiver of Israeli design was added after initial delivery. Jamming pods and integrated countermeasures developed by Israeli contractors are carried on missions where the threat environment demands them. These systems are understood to have been progressively upgraded throughout the Ra'am's service life as the threat environment evolved. The F-15I is flown by the Israeli Air Force's 69th Squadron, known as the Hammers, based at Hatzerim Air Base in the Negev Desert near Beersheba. The squadron has a combat lineage reaching back through the F-4 Phantom era, and the transition to the Ra'am in the late 1990s gave it a deep strike capability that fundamentally changed its operational role within the Israeli Air Force. 25 aircraft were delivered between 1996 and 1998 at a total program cost of approximately $2 billion, a figure that included the substantial Israeli modification work and weapons integration performed in Israel. Despite the subsequent introduction of the F-35I Ra'am into Israeli service beginning in December of 2016, the Ra'am has not been replaced in its core mission and has not been reduced in operational priority. The F-35I provides low observable penetration capability against the highest threat environments and is used for missions where stealth is the primary operational requirement. The Ra'am provides payload mass, range, and the ability to deliver large quantities of heavy munitions against known fixed targets, a mission profile for which a stealth platform with an internal weapons bay has inherent physical limitations. The two aircraft are operationally complementary, and current Israeli doctrine uses both based on what each target set requires. When Israel needs to penetrate a defended radar environment without triggering air defense system responses, it sends the F-35I. When it needs to put 56 bunker buster bombs through a reinforced command bunker, it sends the Ra'am. In December of 2025, Israel signed a contract for 25 F-15IA fighters based on the American F-15EX Eagle II platform, with an option for an additional 25. The F-15IA will represent the next generation of Israeli Eagle capability, incorporating the APG-82 active electronically scanned array radar, the Eagle Passive Active Warning and Survivability System Electronic Warfare Suite, Open Mission Systems Architecture for Rapid Capability Integration, Digital Fly-by-Wire Flight Controls, a large area touchscreen cockpit display, and Israeli-specific avionics and weapons integration performed in Israel by local defense contractors. The contract extends the Ra'am family's presence in Israeli service well into the future, and confirms that the F-15, in evolving Israeli configurations, remains central to Israeli air power strategy, despite the presence of a fifth-generation fleet. To understand the Ra'am fully, you must understand the F-15 program it descended from, because the Eagle's airframe and aerodynamic philosophy are the foundation on which all subsequent variants including the Ra'am were built. The story of the F-15 begins in the early 1960s and is inseparable from the lessons the United States Air Force was learning at great cost over North Vietnam. The Air Force entered the Vietnam War with an inventory built around the doctrine of missile supremacy. The prevailing assumption among planners and procurement officials through the late 1950s was that the era of close-in dogfighting was effectively over. Modern jet combat, the thinking went, would be decided by beyond visual range missiles fired from radar-equipped interceptors, long before the enemy came into gun range. On this basis, the Air Force had removed the gun from its primary frontline fighter, the F-4 Phantom II, and invested in radar-guided Sparrow missiles and heat-seeking Sidewinders as the definitive air-to-air weapons system. Vietnam proved this assumption catastrophically wrong. The rules of engagement over North Vietnam frequently required visual identification of any target before a missile could be fired, eliminating the beyond visual range advantage almost entirely. Missile reliability was poor by the standards demanded in actual combat. The Sparrow in particular had a guidance system that was sensitive to electronic jamming, prone to failure at high G-loads, and required the launching aircraft to continue pointing its radar at the target throughout the missile's flight, preventing the pilot from maneuvering to protect himself. The F-4 itself, a large and powerful aircraft designed primarily for fleet air defense and nuclear strike delivery, was consistently outmaneuvered by the much lighter and more agile Soviet-built MiG-21 and MiG-17 in the kinds of turning engagements that characterized actual combat over the Red River Valley. Kill ratios that American planners had assumed would mirror the results of the Korean War did not materialize. The Air Force's kill-to-loss ratio in Vietnam was disturbingly close to 2-to-1 at its best periods, compared to the 10-to-1 ratios that American air power advocates had predicted. The crisis crystallized in April of 1965, when two F-105 Thunderchiefs were shot down by MiG-17s attacking the Thon Hoa Bridge. The MiG-17 was an aircraft the Air Force had considered effectively obsolete, a subsonic straight-wing fighter from the early 1950s. The fact that it could engage and destroy American aircraft worth many times its cost demonstrated that speed and missile armament were not sufficient substitutes for maneuverability and situational awareness. In January of 1965, Secretary of Defense Robert McNamara had already directed the Air Force to examine requirements for a new tactical fighter design. In April of that same year, Harold Brown, then director of the Department of Defense's Research and Engineering Office, formally initiated studies of what was designated the Fighter Experimental, or FX. The initial industry responses to those studies reflected the same institutional tendency toward large, multi-role, high-speed designs that had produced the F-4 and the troubled F-111. The first round of concepts reviewed in 1966 were aircraft weighing over 60,000 pounds with variable sweep wings, top speeds of Mach 2.7, and thrust-to-weight ratios as low as 0.75. In size, weight, and complexity, they were indistinguishable from the aircraft the Air Force was already flying, and they addressed none of the core maneuverability and situational awareness deficiencies that had exposed American pilots to such severe risk over North Vietnam. The turning point came from a group of Air Force officers and defense analysts who came to be known informally as the Fighter Mafia. The intellectual leader of this group was Colonel John Boyd, who had spent years developing what he called energy maneuverability theory, a rigorous analytical framework for quantifying and comparing fighter performance. Boyd's theory held that a fighter's combat effectiveness could be expressed as its ability to manage its total energy, meaning the sum of its kinetic and potential energy, relative to an adversary across a range of maneuver conditions. An aircraft that could gain energy faster than its opponent, or that could exchange altitude for speed and back again more efficiently, would consistently achieve the offensive position in air combat regardless of the specific geometry of a particular engagement. Boyd's analysis drove a clear conclusion. A high thrust-to-weight ratio combined with low wing loading was the fundamental requirement. Variable sweep wings added weight, mechanical complexity, and maintenance burden without delivering a decisive performance advantage. Large multi-role airframes were inherently compromised in the air-to-air role, because the weight required to carry heavy strike payloads reduced the energy margins available for maneuvering against an adversary fighter. Boyd and his colleagues argued forcefully within the Air Force that the FX needed to be a pure air superiority design, unencumbered by the ground attack requirements that had diluted the F-4's air-to-air performance and the multi-role vision that had turned the F-111 into a penetrating bomber rather than a fighter. The phrase most associated with this design philosophy, that there should not be a pound of weight on the airframe that was not dedicated to the air-to-air mission, became a rallying point for those who wanted the FX to be a true dedicated fighter rather than another compromise platform. In December of 1967, General Dynamics and McDonnell Douglas were awarded concept exploration contracts for an aircraft designated the FX Air Superiority Fighter. In September of 1968, final design proposals were submitted by Fairchild Hiller, North American Rockwell, McDonnell Douglas, and General Dynamics. Fairchild Hiller proposed a design with widely spaced engine nacelles intended to improve survivability by making it mechanically difficult for a single missile hit to disable both engines simultaneously. North American submitted the NA-335, a lifting body fuselage design with an integrated wing structure drawing on the company's XB-70 Valkyrie bomber experience with high-speed aerodynamics. McDonnell Douglas presented the design that would become the F-15, featuring the largest wing area, the largest internal fuel capacity, and the most competitive projected unit cost of any submission. The McDonnell Douglas proposal scored highest across all 4 evaluation categories used by the Air Force Assessment Team. In December of 1969, without a competitive fly-off between full-scale prototypes, the Air Force awarded the engineering and manufacturing development contract exclusively to McDonnell Douglas. The decision to bypass a competitive fly-off was driven partly by urgency created by intelligence assessments of the Soviet MiG-25 Foxbat. A MiG-25 had been photographed at an air show in 1967, and American analysts initially assessed it as a highly maneuverable, high-performance air superiority fighter based on its large size, large wing area, and twin-engine configuration. The assessment was incorrect. The MiG-25 was primarily a high-altitude interceptor optimized for speed, not a dogfighter, and its airframe turned out to have significant structural limitations at high G-loads. But the fear of a Soviet breakthrough in maneuvering performance drove the Air Force to accelerate the program timeline, and a competitive fly-off would have added time the Air Force believed it could not afford. The design that McDonnell Douglas produced drew on aerodynamic research conducted at NASA's Langley Research Center, where a team had developed a series of lightweight fighter study configurations designated LFAX. The LFAX-8 configuration in particular made a strong impression on the McDonnell Douglas design team and contributed directly to the fundamental wing and fuselage layout of the F-15. McDonnell Douglas modified the concept to accommodate a larger radar dish in the nose than the Langley team had originally allowed for, which increased supersonic drag but was considered essential for the look-down, shoot-down fire control radar the Air Force required. The increased nose diameter was accepted as a necessary performance compromise to achieve the radar capability that would define the aircraft's tactical value. The first prototype, designated yttrium fluoride-15A and carrying serial number 710280, was assembled at the McDonnell Douglas facility in St. Louis and rolled out on June 26, 1972. It was disassembled, crated, and loaded aboard a Lockheed C-5 Galaxy transport for shipment to Edwards Air Force Base in California. McDonnell Douglas Chief Test Pilot Irving Burroughs flew the aircraft for the first time on July 27, 1972, conducting a series of handling quality tests that confirmed the design's basic aerodynamic soundness and its high angle of attack recovery characteristics. Early test flights revealed a severe buffeting problem associated with the initial wingtip design that generated unacceptable vibration loads on the horizontal stabilizers. The engineering solution was to reduce the size of the wingtips and introduce small notched cutouts in the horizontal stabilizers to disrupt the resonant aerodynamic interaction. modifications that were incorporated into all subsequent production aircraft. 12 prototypes in total were built for the Flight Test and Systems Evaluation Program. The program developed in parallel with low-rate initial production beginning in 1973. The first operational aircraft, an F-15B 2C trainer, was delivered to the Air Force at Luke Air Force Base, Arizona, on November 14, 1974, in a ceremony presided over by President Gerald Ford, who was briefed on the aircraft's capabilities as part of the formal handover. Initial operational capability for combat-ready single-seat F-15A aircraft was achieved in September of 1975, with the first tactical fighter wing at Langley Air Force Base, Virginia. The F-15A was a single-seat air superiority fighter. Its airframe was designed around a service life of 4,000 hours, later extended through structural testing and life extension modification programs to 8,000 hours. It was powered by two Pratt & Whitney F-100 PW-100 afterburning turbofan engines generating approximately 23,000 pounds of thrust each at maximum afterburner, giving the aircraft a thrust-to-weight ratio exceeding 1:1 in combat configuration at low fuel states, a capability that no production fighter in Western inventories had previously achieved. Empty weight was approximately 41,500 pounds. Maximum takeoff weight reached 56,000 pounds. Top speed was Mach 2.5. The wing was designed with a large area and moderate sweep to produce low wing loading numbers, enabling the sustained turn rates that Boyd's energy maneuverability analysis had identified as decisive in combat. The aircraft carried the APG-63 multimode radar, the first fighter radar capable of operating in a genuine look-down shoot-down mode, distinguishing moving low-flying targets from the radar return of the ground below them, with sufficient reliability to support missile engagements. This capability had been unavailable in earlier fighters and was considered a transformative tactical advantage. The Air Force introduced the F-15 to the public and to Congress as the first dedicated air superiority fighter the service had fielded since the F-86 Sabre of the Korean War. The intervening 2 decades had produced a series of fighters that were fundamentally interceptors or strike aircraft, with a secondary air-to-air capability. Not true air superiority platforms designed from the beginning to win dogfights against the best adversary aircraft. The F-15 changed that. The first country outside the United States to receive the F-15 was Israel. The first Israeli Eagles arrived in October of 1976 and were designated by the Israeli Air Force as the Baz, which means Falcon in Hebrew. Israel received F-15A and B models initially, later supplemented by F-15C and D variants. The aircraft did not spend long on the ground before seeing combat. On June 27, 1979, 8 Syrian MiG-21s attempted to intercept Israeli Air Force aircraft conducting strikes against PLO positions in Lebanon. Israeli F-15 Baz fighters engaged the Syrian formation. 4 MiG-21s were shot down by the Eagles, and a 5th was destroyed by an Israeli Kafir fighter that joined the engagement. The Israeli aircraft suffered no losses. These kills represented the first combat victories ever recorded by any F-15, establishing the Eagles' combat record at 5 kills and 0 losses. On the first day, it fired its weapons in anger. That record continued to grow through the remainder of 1979 and into the early 1980s. Israeli F-15s shot down 4 more Syrian MiG-21s on September 24, 1979, again without loss. On July 29, 1981, an Israeli F-15 scored one of the most significant air-to-air kills of the era when it destroyed a Syrian MiG-25 Foxbat, the same aircraft that had driven the urgency behind the F-15's development program. 2 Syrian MiG-23s fell to Israeli F-15s on April 21, 1982, as tensions along the Lebanese border continued to escalate toward the confrontation that would produce the most significant air battle of the Cold War era. That confrontation came on June 9, 1982, in what became known as the Beqaa Valley Air Battle, sometimes called the Beqaa Valley Turkey Shoot. The context was Israel's invasion of Lebanon, designated Operation Peace for Galilee, intended to destroy PLO infrastructure and push Syrian forces back from the Israeli border. The Syrians had positioned 19 surface-to-air missile batteries across the Beqaa Valley, including 15 SA-6 batteries representing the most capable radar-guided surface-to-air system the Soviet Union had exported to any regional ally. These batteries were understood to pose a severe threat to Israeli strike aircraft operating over Lebanon. The Israeli Air Force had spent years planning how to neutralize that threat. On the morning of June 9, approximately 26 F-4 Phantoms and a similar number of IAI Kfir fighters conducted a suppression of enemy air defenses strike, using anti-radiation missiles and laser-guided bombs to systematically destroy the SAM batteries and their associated radar and control van infrastructure. 2 hours later, 17 of the 19 Syrian SAM sites had been destroyed. The Israeli strike aircraft also targeted Syrian mobile ground-controlled intercept radar sites, blinding the Syrian fighter control network. When Syrian commanders scrambled 3 squadrons of MiG-21s and MiG-23s to respond, those aircraft flew into the valley without functioning radar guidance, without reliable communications to ground controllers, and directly into the waiting combat air patrols established by Israeli F-15s and F-16s. The Israeli formation, alerted well in advance by a Grumman E-2 Hawkeye airborne early warning aircraft orbiting over southern Lebanon, had accurate tracking information on every Syrian aircraft from the moment they departed their bases. The result was a massacre. In the engagements of June 9 alone, 29 Syrian aircraft were shot down. On June 10, the fighting continued, and Israeli pilot Avner Nava became the first F-15 ace in history, shooting down 2 MiG-23s and a MiG-21 on June 10 to bring his total kills across the engagement to 5, having previously downed 2 MiG-21s in September of 1979. 44 of the total 88 Syrian kills across the Lebanon air battles of 1982 were credited to F-15 Eagles, 33 were credited to F-16s. Israeli losses were limited and did not include any aircraft lost in air-to-air combat. One F-15 was struck by an SA-6 surface-to-air missile and sustained severe damage, but its pilot flew it back to Israel, where it was repaired and returned to service. The Syrian Air Force was effectively destroyed as an operational force. The implications of the Beqaa Valley battle were understood immediately by both American and Soviet military establishments. The United States Air Force conducted secret debriefings of Israeli pilots and commanders to extract the tactical lessons of the engagement. Those lessons directly informed the planning for the opening night of Operation Desert Storm in January of 1991, where coalition planners employed drone decoys, electronic jamming, and simultaneous multi-axis strikes to replicate the systematic suppression of Iraqi air defenses that Israel had demonstrated was achievable. Meanwhile, one of the most remarkable demonstrations of the F-15's structural engineering margin occurred in 1983 during a training exercise over Israeli airspace. Israeli Air Force Captain Zevi Nadivi was flying an F-15D when a mid-air collision with an Israeli A-4 Skyhawk during a training exercise tore away nearly the entire right wing of his Eagle. The aircraft lost virtually all lift-generating surface on the right side of the airframe. By any conventional aerodynamic analysis, the aircraft should have entered an immediate unrecoverable departure from controlled flight. Instead, Nadivi applied full afterburner and pulled back on the controls. The thrust from the twin engines and the lift generated by the fuselage itself, combined with the asymmetric aerodynamic forces of the remaining left wing, provided enough control authority to keep the aircraft from rolling uncontrollably. Nadivi flew the damaged aircraft to Hatzerim Air Base and landed it successfully on the runway. The aircraft was subsequently repaired and returned to service. The incident became one of the most cited examples of structural overengineering in the history of fighter aircraft design. The F-15C and D models entered Air Force inventory beginning in 1979, incorporating Production Eagle Package 2000 upgrades that added 2,000 pounds of additional internal fuel, provision for conformal fuel tanks under the original designation Fast Pack standing for Fuel and Sensor Tactical, and an increased maximum takeoff weight of 68,000 pounds. The conformal tanks were a genuinely significant enhancement, adding substantial fuel capacity with far less aerodynamic drag than conventional external drop tanks, and also providing structural stations that could be configured to carry sensor and electronic warfare equipment. The F-15C equipped the backbone of American air superiority squadrons through the 1980s. Desert Storm in January and February of 1991 gave the F-15C its first extended combat against a large and theoretically capable opposing air force. The Iraqi Air Force operated MiG-29s, which represented the most modern Soviet fighter then in service, alongside MiG-25s, MiG-23s, and French-built Mirage F-1s. The engagement records tell the story without ambiguity. In the 43 days of the air campaign, F-15Cs were credited with 32 of the 36 Air Force air-to-air victories. The kills included MiG-29s, MiG-25s, MiG-23s, Mirage F-1s, and Su-25s. After the top tier of Iraqi pilots were eliminated in the first 3 days of combat, the majority of subsequent kills involved Iraqi aircraft attempting to flee to Iran rather than engage American fighters. Not a single F-15C was lost to an Iraqi fighter. American pilot Colonel Cesar Rodriguez accumulated 2 confirmed air-to-air kills during Desert Storm, making him one of the highest-scoring American aces of the post-Vietnam era. He would later add a 3rd kill of a Serbian MiG-29 during Operation Allied Force over Yugoslavia in 1999, becoming the most decorated air-to-air combat pilot in the post-Vietnam American military. The F-15E Strike Eagle operated during Desert Storm alongside the air superiority variant but in a completely different role. F-15ES from the 4th Fighter Wing at Seymour Johnson Air Force Base, North Carolina, deployed to Saudi Arabia and conducted the majority of their missions at night using the LANT-IRN targeting system. Their primary mission was to locate and destroy Iraqi Scud ballistic missile launchers, which were mobile, frequently repositioned after firing, and camouflaged in desert terrain. The search for Scud launchers required the LANT-IRN pod's forward-looking infrared to detect the heat signatures of vehicles that had recently been running their engines. Strike Eagles would sweep large desert areas at low altitude and darkness, scanning for thermal anomalies. When a launcher was located, the crew would designate it with the laser and deliver a precision munition. The mission was extraordinarily difficult. Iraqi Scud crews became skilled at rapid repositioning and concealment. The Strike Eagle suffered 2 losses during the campaign, both to surface-to-air missiles rather than to Iraqi fighters. While the F-15C was establishing its Desert Storm record, McDonnell Douglas had been quietly working on a ground attack derivative for more than a decade. The company had included a basic secondary strike capability in the original F-15 design over the objections of Air Force program managers who used the phrase, "not a pound for air to ground," as an informal slogan for the view that any weight devoted to strike systems would compromise the aircraft's air superiority mission. In 1978, the Air Force initiated the Tactical All-Weather Requirement Study, which examined options for replacing the F-111 in the long-range penetrating strike role and recommended an F-15 derivative as the preferred solution. In 1979, McDonnell Douglas and Hughes Aircraft began formal collaboration on developing air-to-ground avionics for what would become the F-15E. McDonnell Douglas modified the second prototype F-15A trainer, serial number 710291, as an advanced fighter capability demonstrator that first flew on July 8, 1980. The demonstrator was fitted with a PaveTac laser designator targeting pod and displayed at the 1980 Farnborough Air Show. In March of 1981, the Air Force announced the Enhanced Tactical Fighter Program, later renamed the Dual Role Fighter Competition, to select a production aircraft capable of executing deep air interdiction missions without requiring fighter escort or jamming support. General Dynamics submitted the F-16XL, a delta-wing derivative of the Fighting Falcon, with dramatically increased wing area and payload capacity. McDonnell Douglas submitted the F-15E. The evaluation ran from 1981 through April 30, 1983. The F-15E demonstrator logged more than 200 evaluation flights, demonstrated a maximum takeoff weight exceeding 75,000 pounds, and validated 16 distinct weapons-carrying configurations. The Strike Eagle won the competition and entered production. The first F-15E was delivered to the Air Force in April of 1989. The Strike Eagle introduced the dedicated rear-seat weapons systems officer position and a new avionics architecture centered on the APG-70 radar, which added a synthetic aperture ground mapping mode that the air-to-air APG-63 lacked. It integrated the LANT-IRN pod system as standard equipment, used conformal fuel tanks as a baseline configuration rather than an optional kit, and carried a weapons hardpoint system capable of handling the full range of precision-guided munitions that the American inventory was developing through the mid-1980s. The strengthened airframe accommodated the added weight of strike mission systems, additional fuel, and the larger and heavier precision munitions required for the deep interdiction role. It was the Strike Eagle that Israel selected in 1994 as the foundation for the Ra'am. The Israeli Air Force had been operating F-15A and C models since October of 1976, and had accumulated more air-to-air combat experience with the Eagle family than any other operator in the world. But the growing range of threats Israel faced in the 1990s, including the need to hold targets at strategic depth in Syria and Iran at risk, and the proliferation of advanced surface-to-air missile systems across the region, demanded a platform with greater standoff reach, heavier precision munitions payload, and the ability to penetrate defended airspace at night and in poor weather. The Israeli Air Force evaluated the F-16 Fighting Falcon, which was already in Israeli service in large numbers and well understood by Israeli ground crews and pilots, and the F/A-18 Hornet, before selecting the Strike Eagle derivative in early 1994. Israel placed an initial order for 21 aircraft that May, with 4 more added in November, bringing the fleet to 25. Production and delivery spanned 1996 to 1998. The Ra'am incorporated a range of Israeli-specific modifications that made it operationally distinct from the American F-15E from the beginning of its service life. The standard APG-70 radar was modified to the APG-70I specification. The Elbit display and sight helmet was substituted for American helmet systems, reflecting Israeli advances in the technology. A radar warning receiver of Israeli design was added. The main mission computer was replaced with an Israeli-developed system. The electronic warfare suite was configured by Israeli contractors to requirements that have not been publicly disclosed, but are understood to have been more demanding than standard American export configurations. Targeting pods, data links, and specialized countermeasures reflecting Israeli operational experience were integrated throughout. The F-15EX Eagle II, which entered operational service with the United States Air Force in July of 2024, when the Oregon Air National Guard's 142nd Fighter Wing at Portland achieved initial operational capability, represents the current peak of F-15 development. The program was initiated in 2019 to replace the aging F-15C and D fleet, which had been flying beyond its design service life and was approaching structural failure risk in the oldest airframes. The Eagle II incorporates the Raytheon APG-82 active electronically scanned array radar, which provides dramatically improved tracking range and resolution compared to the mechanically scanned APG-63, along with simultaneous track and jam capability that allows the radar to operate in an electronic warfare mode while continuing to track multiple airborne targets. The BAE Systems Eagle Passive Active Warning and Survivability System provides full-spectrum threat detection, radar warning, jamming, and countermeasures management in an integrated system that the Air Force describes as the most capable self-protection suite ever fitted to an F-15. The aircraft uses digital fly-by-wire flight controls, which the F-15EX introduced for the first time in the F-15 family, along with a large-area touchscreen cockpit display and the Advanced Display Core Processor 2 mission computer, capable of executing 87 billion operations per second. Airframe service life was extended to 20,000 flight hours, more than double the original F-15C specification, and representing a half-century of expected operational life for each aircraft. Maximum payload increased to 29,500 pounds across up to 22 weapon stations, giving it the largest weapons load of any fighter in the American inventory. The Air Force plans to acquire 104 F-15EX aircraft as a replacement for the legacy C and D fleet, with the fiscal year 2026 defense budget allocating $3.1 billion for 21 additional airframes. The F-15 family began with the lessons of Vietnam, was forged in the Cold War arms race, proved itself in the skies over Lebanon and Iraq, and has been continuously evolved through a half-century of technological refinement into what the Israelis are now flying over Beirut. The Eagle's undefeated air-to-air record, more than 100 confirmed kills against 0 losses to enemy fighters across every conflict in which it has been employed, represents something without precedent in the history of jet combat. No other aircraft in the history of aviation has compiled that record against so many different adversaries over so many decades. The Israeli Air Force's F-15I Ra'am carries that record forward and adds to it the deep precision strike capability that has made it the instrument of choice for targeting some of the most hardened and most carefully hidden targets in the Middle East. Today, as F-15I Ra'am jets circle back to their bases in the Negev after the largest coordinated strike of the Lebanon war, the aircraft that Kelly Johnson's engineers never thought would still be flying in the 21st century continues to define what an air power campaign looks like. It has done so since 1976. It will continue to do so in increasingly capable Israeli and American variants for decades yet to come.